Now, today we're going to focus again, okay? We're looking at our series titled Focus, and today we're going to look in Matthew chapter 14, and this is our second week. As last week we were laying the foundation of focusing. Last week we talked about positivity versus negativity. We talked about focusing on the good, and it's important for us to focus on the good in a world where there's plenty of things that are going wrong all around us, plenty of things going wrong in your own life. There are times when we need to just focus on the good. And today I want to take that a little bit further, because not only are we focusing on the good, we're going to focus on the best today. And we're going to talk about focusing on Christ. And this is important for us to learn today. And one of the things that, we're going to talk about is our eyes. When you focus, when you're looking, you use your eyes. There are many times in our life where that's the first thing that goes, is our eyes. God knew this, that our eyes would be swayed by different things, and that's something that we're going to talk about today. By way of starting, I thought about a funny story that happened when I was a kid. And I love telling stories about myself, but even better is when you tell about your family, okay? Because my family's not here. They live in Florida, so I can tell stories, and hopefully by the time I see them, they'll forget about it. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about my mom, and she was on the phone, and she says, "I heard what you said about me." I went, "Uh-oh." Hopefully she forgets by the time I see this summer. But my brother, when he was younger, he had just learned to ride his bike. And, that was something fun for us. I was riding my bike. I'm 3 years older than him, riding my bike. And, he wanted to ride it too. So he was learning. He was working very hard at riding his bike. And so one day he got on his bike, and my mom was helping him. And he says, "I got this. I can do this by myself." So he starts riding his bike, and man, he was doing a wonderful job there in our neighborhood. And he was riding down the street, and he looks back at my mom and he says, "I'm doing it. Nothing can stop me now." About that time, he hit a mailbox and knocked him right off of his bike. And I thought, man, that was so funny. He took his eyes off of what he was supposed to be focusing on. But then I have to tell the story about myself as a teenager. I thought that was always the most hilarious story. Well, myself as a teenager, we used to ride our bikes. I know teens don't know how to do that nowadays, but we went outside, we rode our bikes, okay? And we were chasing each other, just having fun. And I remember one time we were playing tag or something, and riding our bike, and you're looking back, and I remember distinctly, I don't know how I remember after what happened, but distinctly I remember looking back and seeing who was about to tag me, and there was a parked car. I didn't hit a moving car, people. I hit a parked car sitting there, slammed right into the car. My head hit the windshield. That was very, very embarrassing. I was hoping nobody saw that. But again, I took my eyes off of what I should have been looking at. And that's what we're going to talk about today. In Scripture, one of Jesus' disciples, he chose to focus on God. And in Matthew 14, we're going to see this idea that Peter is someone that was focused on Jesus Christ. And that is where our focus should be. However, we're also going to see a negative side of this, is that Peter also lost his focus as well. I want to start in Matthew chapter 14 and look at verse 22. It says, "And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship, and to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into the mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea." Okay, they did what they were told to do. But now we see what is going on here is that it is tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. We see early on in this passage, if you were to read back before this part of the passage here, we're going to see that Jesus had asked his disciples to get into a boat and cross the lake. Now we see before this that he had just finished feeding 5,000 people. And if you read it, it says 5,000 what? Men. And there were many, many more that were with them that were not counted. 5,000, at least 5,000 people were fed. And this was an amazing miracle that happened. And I'm sure that with that big of a crowd, the way that it was positioned, the way that everybody was sitting, they could see the one who was passing out that bread. They could see the one that was feeding them. Everybody's eyes were focused on Jesus Christ. The disciples, their jaw, once they finally picked it up after seeing what all had been done, Their eyes were focused on Jesus Christ, where they should have been. Now we're going to see some things that happen here, and in this passage, as we just read, we see that they were told to go across. They were told to get in the boat and go across the lake. We see what Jesus also did. It says in verse 23, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. Now, if you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about Jesus and how he had separated from the disciples. This was a pattern in his life, and this is not the focus, if you want to use that word today, on our sermon. But I want you to see that as a little side note is that Jesus constantly was getting alone to pray. And here, once again, he says, I've got to go pray. He sends the multitude away. I don't know how that went. How do you do that when you've just fed all these people? How do you get them out of your house, you know? You say 5,000 people, okay, it's time to go, and he separates himself. He tells the disciples to go on, get in the boat and go on. And as we see here, in the midst of the sea, this is the middle of the sea here, their boat was tossed with waves and the wind was contrary. Jesus had asked them to do something. They did it. And we're going to see what happens throughout this. And I want to look at three things here today that the devil will use to get our focus off of Jesus Christ. There has been plenty in this last year. I keep saying that, but I got to keep reiterating. There is plenty of things in this last year that would get your eyes, specifically our church, but our world in general, to get our eyes off of Jesus Christ, to turn our attention. Constantly you're hearing something. Constantly something's coming up. Something new that's distracting, something new that's depressing. All these things are coming up, and it's trying to get our eyes off of our goal, which is Jesus Christ. And today we're going to see three things in this passage that were getting the disciples and their eyes off of Jesus. The first one specifically I want us to talk about, you'll see in Matthew 14 and verse 25. We're going to look at number one. The first one is fear. There was a lot of fear within the disciples because Jesus now was nowhere to be found. They are in the middle of the ocean or the middle of the sea there, the middle of this lake. And as the waves are tossing, the wind is blowing them around. That little bit of fear came upon them. And not only was it fear when Jesus was away, but as they see Jesus, we're going to see here, they were fearful as well. Look here in the passage with me in Matthew 14, verse 25. It says, and in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them. Well, how did Jesus get there? Did he charter a boat? How did he get there? No, a miracle happens. And this is amazing. What does it say here? It says walking on the sea. Can you imagine? I mean, just to be there for a moment, just to see what's going on here as Jesus is walking on the sea. Verse 26, and when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, and rightly so, okay? Let's be honest. If you saw someone walking on water, you'd be a little troubled. What is going on there, okay? So we can't fault them too much, but it was Jesus. And we see what they said here. They said, it is a spirit. And they cried out for, what's that next word? Fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, be of good cheer. It is I. He didn't have to say his name. He said, it is I. Be not afraid. The disciples were convinced that this was a ghost, when in reality it was Jesus. And once he started speaking, the first thing that he says is, don't be afraid. Jesus knew what they would be feeling. Jesus knew what they were going through. Jesus knew because he has that knowledge. He knows what they're dealing with. And the first thing he says is, be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid. Be not afraid. They were looking at the storm that was going on all around them. They were looking at the fact that Jesus was not around, and Jesus immediately tries to calm their fears and calm them down. And many times we've seen that in the Bible. We just talked about last week about how Jesus appeared to the disciples and all the people after he had died, and the first thing he says is peace. First thing he says is be calm. It is I. The first thing we see here is it is I, and that is a voice that we need to hear. When we are going through the storms of life, we need to know that Jesus is there. And this is done by focusing on him and focusing on who he is. But fear comes into our lives. And here we see that he appears walking on the water. And they didn't think it was him. Have you ever been there before in the middle of a storm and things are going on? You're in a situation where it just seems so grim. It just seems so dim that, I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. Things are going on around me. Maybe it's sickness. Maybe it's a death. Maybe it's just hard times. Maybe it's the loss of a job or something. And you are in the middle of this storm and it just seems like, how in the world is this going to get better? We have to remember that Jesus is there. I remember a few years ago, Becca's mom came up and we had decided to go to Shipshewana. How many have gone to Shipshewana in here, okay? Several of you. I've heard you talk about it, how much you like it there. And we had gone there, and we had the kids with us, and we were going to go to the shops there. We ate there and kind of walked around. Well, as we are leaving, do you remember this? As we are leaving, now I'm not somebody that's super afraid of everything other than clowns. I'm not somebody that's super afraid of a lot of things, but for some reason, living in Indiana for the last 11 years has brought about a fear of storms in me. For some reason, because tornadoes, they can just come out of nowhere. You're having a nice day. It'd be like today, and you're kind of like, this is nice, and all of a sudden something pops up in your phone, tornado, whatever it is, watch or warning, whichever it is, and you're like, immediately. When I was living in Florida, you had like 2 weeks, okay? Hurricanes coming, okay, I can chill for a week, and then, by then I can get my stuff, get out of town or something like that. You had plenty of time. But nowadays it's like, it's raining. There's a tornado now, or there's hail coming. And so Becca knows I'm in the house, like looking out the windows. I'm like the dog. The dog's barking, I'm barking. We're looking around. That hailstorm that happened a few weeks ago, I'm looking out the window, and it just, I don't know why, it just messes with me. But I can imagine what's going on here. And let me get back to my story. I almost missed that. We were in Shipshewana, okay? And we're leaving, and all of a sudden we kind of see these storm clouds rolling in. And my wife, I don't know why she said it, but she said, that looks like it could be like tornado clouds or something like that. And immediately my heart goes, da-dum, 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 it starts pounding, And I'm trying to drive, and you can kind of see where the storm is going. I'm trying to drive away, do you remember? And I actually drove towards it on accident. I'm trying to drive and maneuver and get away from it as much as possible, but I'm driving towards this storm where is a possible tornado. And I remember being so scared, and I just hate storms. And being in the middle of a sea, in a boat, as a storm is happening, I can't imagine the anxiety and the fear that is going on in these disciples. And I kind of can put myself in their position. I understand what's going on. But whatever your storm is, I want you to think about the storms of life that you deal with. Think about yourself in this position, that there are times where we just cannot see the light beside the storm, outside of the storm. And for some of us, the storm is that we focus on our past. For some of us, we think that, I can't get out of this storm, and I actually deserve this storm. Because some of the things that I've done in my past, this is something that I actually deserve. And we focus on the storm in that way. Some of us, we focus on the future, what could happen, and we have anxiety and fears about the things that could happen, and maybe the storm's not even there, but we're afraid that something might happen, and that is the storm that comes up in our life. But for Peter here and the rest of the disciples, the storm was caused by the present moment, the things that they were going through. And maybe today, I don't know all your situations, but maybe today you're in a storm, and you're finding it hard to do what? To focus on Jesus. You're finding it hard to focus. You're saying, I'm trying to do what's right. I'm trying to go through the motions, but I can't see out of this storm. I want you to notice what happens here. When we're in a storm, we've got to make our decision before the storm happens. We've got to decide before the storm happens that I am going to put my focus and my trust in Jesus Christ. Much of their anxiety here, much of their fear that came here in this passage was because they did not know what Jesus was going to do. They were still learning about Jesus. They were still hearing things about Jesus. Well, my prayer here today for you is that you know Jesus. And if you don't know him, you can know him today. And as you know him, you gain a knowledge of who he is and the things that he can do for you and the things that he can do for you through the storm and get you out of the storm or even be there with you during the storm. That is my prayer for you today, is that you would know him and know who he is. And we've got to choose to focus on Jesus Christ. You see, this was a choice here. And the disciples, they were very fearful. They saw a man walking on the water. They saw the storm that was going on around us. and it seemed very bleak. But now we see the second thing that comes up here. Not only was it fear that was there, but we're also going to see, number two, there were distractions. As we continue on in Matthew chapter 14, we see that in Peter and the disciples' situation, the storm itself acted as a distraction, and it caused them to lose focus. Matthew 14, verse 28, this is a very famous passage here, but I want to read it to you today. It says, "And Peter answered him." Peter realizes who it is now. Peter realizes this is the man I've been walking with. This is the God-man that was sent here as a baby. This is the one. This is the Messiah. I hear your voice. You see, Peter knew Jesus, so therefore when he heard his voice, he knew now who it was. This is no spirit. This is my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. What does he say here? And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come unto thee on the water." This is bold, isn't it? But that's the kind of man Peter is, right? We've talked about this over and over again. This is Peter. Peter is the one, he is bold. Verse 29, "And he said, Come." And when Peter was come down out of the ship, now how many of us in here would get out of the ship? Okay, I heard you. You said I could come. I asked for it. I don't know if I'm ready for it, okay? He says, "Come." Peter, being the bold person he is, he came down out of the ship. He walked on the water. What a miracle to go to Jesus. What faith Peter had in this moment. And if it just ended like that, man, Peter was a man of faith. Peter, this is such a great story. Wow, he walked on water. But like many of us, we cannot judge him and we cannot look down on him because like many of us, look at verse 30, "But when he saw," he is no longer looking at the one speaking anymore. When he saw, what does he see? The wind was boisterous. It says he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried, saying, "Lord, save me." There are many distractions that come in our lives. That day to day, we face distractions on a minute by minute, on an hour by hour basis. I was talking to the family last night, the Lovins. We went to their house. Sorry to throw you out there. But we enjoyed a meal with them. And I was talking to them, and he says, "Well, when do you study?" And I said, "Well, Monday morning is one of the most important times for me." So just to tell everybody in the church, if you need me, that's fine. You can text me, call me, whatever. As much as possible on Monday morning, I want to get my bones of my sermon. I want to know what I'm preaching for that week, or else the whole week I'm fidgeting. I don't know what I'm doing. If I have something on Monday, Tuesday I'm fidgeting. And so they said, "Well, when do you study?" I said, "Monday morning." I try as best as I can to do what? I take this guy right here and I turn him upside down, okay? That's hard, right? That's hard for us to do. And then you hear it buzz, and you're like, "Ooh, I wonder what it was." But I try as best as possible just to focus. But this is our world that we live in. We are constantly being pulled by distractions. Things are coming in, but the truth is the devil knows that. And he knows that maybe he cannot destroy us because we have faith in Jesus Christ. But you know what he's going to try to do? He's going to try to distract us. We see in Matthew chapter 4, if you want to look back there, if you have your Bible, you want to look back at Matthew chapter 4, it'll be up on the screen as well. Matthew chapter 4 and verse 1, we're going to see that the devil used this very tactic on Jesus. He says, "I know that I cannot destroy Jesus, but I'm going to distract him." Verse 1 says, "Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights," that in itself is something. "He was afterward," it says he was an hungered. Nowadays we'd say hangry, right? Hungry. We're very, very hungry, okay? It just puts he's hungry. But in my mind, I would be like, I am starving. Notice what happens here. "And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. But he answered and said, It is written." What did he answer him with? The Scripture. Jesus answered him with the Scriptures. "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God." He says, take these stones and make them bread. You're hungry. Take these stones, make them bread. That will feed you. And Jesus says, you know what? He says, man's not going to live by bread alone. He says, but every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. And I was thinking about this, you want to see some bread? Well, let's look at chapter 14. I'm about to feed 5,000 people with bread. I'll do it on my own. I'll do it in my own timing. I don't need you tempting me and distracting me. He was about to do a great thing. Continue reading here. In verse 5, it says, Then the devil taketh him up into the holy city, and setteth him on the pinnacle of the temple. And he saith unto him, If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written, He shall give his angels charge concerning thee. And in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against the stone. Oh, you want to see bread? I'm going to show you some bread. Oh, you want to see a stone? One day I'm going to roll a big stone away when I am raised from the dead. You want to tempt me with these things? Well, you just wait and see. There's going to be some amazing things happening soon. Verse 7, Jesus said unto him, It is written again, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Again, the devil taketh him up into exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, and saith unto him, All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Let's go to Revelation, where you will see that I will rule and reign for all of eternity. Let's go to Revelation, where you'll see the angels saying, Holy, holy, holy. I don't need you to tell me to fall before you. I don't need the world, because you don't have the world. I am in control. And Jesus basically tells him to take that stuff and go away with it. Verse 10, then saith Jesus unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Then the devil leaveth him, and behold, the angels came and ministered unto him. Satan knew that he could not destroy Jesus, but he was going to do his best to distract him. We see this especially in verse 9, where he distracts him with the kingdoms of the world and the glory. All of this I will give you. And Jesus says, Get thee behind me. Get away from me, Satan. And he went and he prayed to Jesus, or prayed to God, his Father. There are numerous occasions where this takes place in Jesus' ministry, where things are trying to distract him. He says, I have got to be about my Father's business. We see here that in this story specifically, the wind and the waves were coming after the disciples. But I want you to think about yourself. What are the things that the devil's distracting you with today? What's he getting you down with? What is he trying to keep you away? How is it hurting your faith today? What are the things that he's trying to pull at you? Is it something social? Is it something frustrating? Is it something this or that he's trying to pull your focus away from Jesus Christ? I'm going to get on this bandwagon. I'm going to get on that bandwagon. I'm going to go this way. I'm going to get frustrated with that. I'm going to share this. I'm going to do this. And we take our eyes off of Jesus Christ, who is the only one that can change any of this stuff on this earth. He is the only one that can do anything. And here he says, I'm getting out of the boat. But as he gets out of the boat, as Peter gets out of the boat, he loses focus. Jesus is the only one that could sustain him. He's the only one that could allow him to walk on water, and he's the only one that can allow you and help you through the storms that are happening in your life. What are the things that are getting you down? What are the things that are distracting you? The devil knows exactly each and every one of us. He knows the thing that's going to distract you from Jesus Christ, and he's going to use that. You know what? Many times it's our eyes, but what happens with our eyes when we're distracted? Our body goes that way. I was thinking about this driving when I was learning to drive. I told you the story about my mom teaching me. Well, one of the worst things was when I was driving is to look in the other lane to see if a car is in your blind spot. But the problem with me whenever I was driving and I went to look at my blind spot is when I turned, for some reason my arms went with me. So you'd hear screeching, honking at me, and my mom would say, stop, and I get that thing in my chest again, she'd hit me again. Be careful. But that's what happens in our life is you say, well, my eyes aren't on Jesus, but my body is. No, your body, your mind, your everything is going to follow your eyes. That is why it's so important to keep our eyes on Jesus Christ. The distractions will come, but we've got to keep our eyes on Jesus Christ. And lastly, real quick, we continue on here in this passage and we see number 3, we see doubt. The Bible says that Peter sinks and he calls for Jesus to save him. Matthew 14:31 says, And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand, and he caught him. And he saith unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? See, that Peter had faith. Peter was the only one that had enough faith to climb out of the boat, to climb out onto the waters, to walk to Jesus, and yet in his faith, he became distracted. In his faith, he began to doubt. He began to look around, and he says, I know who I'm looking at. I know what all you've done. I've seen your miracles. I see you walking on the water, but look at all these things around me. And his doubt crept in, and it began to cause him to sink. Peter had faith initially when he stepped out of the boat and when he started walking to Jesus, but when he realized what he was doing, when he realized his circumstances around him, that is when he began to doubt. He was questioning whether or not Jesus was actually the one in control. And maybe today you're doing the same thing. Maybe today your question is, God, are you really in the middle of this storm? It feels like I'm being tossed. It feels like I'm being pulled from this side to that side. The wind and the waves of this life, they're pulling me. I'm distracted by the troubles in my life. I'm distracted by the negativity. I'm distracted by all these things in the world. God, are you really in control? I want to take you to one verse here in Psalms chapter 46, one passage. Very famous passage again, Psalms 46 and verse 1. It should be up on the screen as well. It says, verse 1, God is our refuge and strength. What does it say? He is a very present help in trouble. But look at this in verses 2 and 3. Because of who God is and what I know about God, that he is a refuge, that he is a strength, that he is my help. When things around me are falling apart because of these things, verse 2, therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though the waters thereof roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. Some of you in here might be in a storm. Some of you might be in for a storm that's coming. Some of you might have just gotten out of the storm. Wherever you are, Jesus is there with you. And that is my encouragement for you today, is to focus on Jesus Christ. There are many things that will distract you, many things that will cause you to doubt, many things that will cause you to fear. But know this verse, memorize this verse. God is our refuge and our strength. God is the one that is a very present help in our trouble.